We'll see, my big voice. Good evening. Welcome. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sandra Chernobori, one of the college advisors here at Paly. I'm really excited about our event tonight. Before we get started, I have several thank yous in order. So I'm not sure if our volunteers are in the room or still in the lobby, but I wanted to give an acknowledgement to the PTSA who's sponsoring this event. It is your donations to PTSA or help make events like this possible. In particular, I want to thank Diana Pang, Adrian Shi, Katie Shade, Judy Huang, and Jake Wellington, who have helped me organize our evening tonight. Everything from planting the seed that it was time to hold this event again, to the logistics of welcoming our guests this evening, and making sure that people knew where to be and supporting us here tonight. So thank you very much to the PTSA. Also, I want to acknowledge that we have a student videotaping our panel this evening. Sebastian Chapella Joy, excuse me if I'm pronouncing your last name wrong, he's up in the balcony. So shout out to Sebastian. Thank you for volunteering your time tonight. We appreciate it. Eventually, we will be posting this on the pally.net/CCC YouTube channel, where you can review this as well as other presentations and panel. But most importantly, thank you to our guests for being here this evening, taking time out of their very busy schedule during this admission season to spend some time with us to help kind of demystify college applications and admissions. These are experts in the field. Tonight, you have a handout that explains the institutions that they represent. And so as I ask them questions this evening, ranging from things about how colleges, their institutions look at GPAs and test scores, extracurriculars and the like, they'll be answering kind of from the point of view of where they currently work. But I want you to know they have a vast experience from different institutions. Tonight, I purposely invited schools that have some differences. A smaller school, but with D1 sports, to large public institutions, for example. And I think we have a lot to learn. I always enjoy, this is the third time I've done this panel, and I always enjoy it. I always get re-energized by the passion that these folks have for their jobs. I think that students sometimes view the admissions representatives maybe with a little fear, but these are some of the most warm, welcoming people I know, and really view themselves as counselors. And in their role tonight, I think that you will see that they have a very human touch when it comes to reviewing applications. So please join me in welcoming our guests tonight. I want to acknowledge off the bat that I did not invite the CSU and UC California systems on purpose. I feel like we talk a lot about admission to our California institutions, and we talk about eligibility and application review at length, not only with students but at our parent nights. This is an opportunity to hear from some out-of-state publics and privates, and hopefully to expose you to some different ideas. So, again, very grateful that they took time out of their busy schedule. In terms of the format of our event tonight, I will act as moderator and ask questions. Not every person will answer every question. I think people will kind of join in as relevant to either add a different perspective or additional comments. I'll ask some follow-up questions. And the idea here is not necessarily to generalize that this is what would happen at every college, but to give you an idea of different practices across a range of schools. The one thing I would like to caution is that these are the answers tonight. The answers might change. Colleges are dynamic institutions. And so, you have to know that this is not kind of learning about secrets and looking at a crystal ball into the future, but rather gathering some insight with which to kind of approach this process. So, without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks again. So one of the first areas that I wanted to talk about are how colleges, when they look at applications, look at student transcripts and grade point averages. So I was hoping you could start by talking a little bit about how you evaluate a student transcript.
Everybody at once?
Who wants to start? Okay.
Go for it.
Should we pass this?
We have a cut.
We've all got
Well, good evening. Oh, is this thing on?
Yes.
Okay, there we go. So as you can imagine, you're going to hear a lot about this over the next, roughly 18 months or so. And I think that all my colleagues would agree that the high school transcript is really the key decision factor when we're evaluating applications. As Sandra mentioned, I think we all do things just, a wee bit differently. And I hope you get an understanding from this evening that, again, far and away, the work that you do over the course of your 4 years in high school is going to be critical to help us make the best decision that we possibly can. In the programs, you'll notice that we all work for offices of admission, not offices of denial. And so we are really trying to find, the best fit, for you and also for us as an institution. But for me personally at Providence, we do recalculate GPAs, and we can go into a little more detail on that later. But the GPA that you see on your report card, on your transcript, that GPA is probably going to look a lot different than the actual number that I use in my evaluation process. So someone's saying, well, why am I taking all these honors and AP courses then? And so for the weight that we take away in the GPA, we give that back to you in what we call our strength of curriculum rating. So I don't want to jump ahead, I know we'll get to this question later, but for us, the rigor of your high school curriculum is crucial for us in the admission process. So as you can imagine, a student that has a loaded coursework level of lots of honors, lots of APs, that student might be able to have a somewhat lower GPA than perhaps a student who hasn't taken a very, very rigorous schedule. And so I know for those of us that do recalculate, it can be a tedious process. You can imagine going through about 1,000 applications saying, and I'm going to use the examples that we have here, okay, world history is a B and a B, okay, that's a 3. The English class is a B plus and A minus, okay, that's a 3.5. And that's what myself and Stephanie did basically from November until basically 2 weeks ago, things like that. But we do look at all of your grades, 9th grade, through the time of application for most of us. Even if you're applying early decision, we still want to see some mid-year grades, things like that. We love to see upward trends, where maybe 9th grade didn't start off as good as you had hoped, and as the rigor increases from 10th to 11th and the 12th grade, your grades respond accordingly. Obviously, what many of us don't want to see is the exact opposite, where maybe 9th grade was kind of a cakewalk for you, and as the rigor increases, your grades sort of go the other way. So we do notice those trends throughout years and within subjects as well. So a big part of our decision factor at Providence is actually your English GPA. So there were, literally hundreds of students this year who were kind of acing most of their classes or solid A's and B's throughout, but with really poor English GPAs as a writing-intensive institution, that's frankly just not going to cut the mustard. So.
Well, I'll comment that Rutgers, we actually do not request transcripts of students. We have students complete a self-reported academic record. So, technically it's not a transcript. We're looking at our coursework submission process is comparable to what you guys will see as seniors, should you apply to Cal State or UC. And I agree with some of Marty's comments about the importance of rigor of curriculum and trends. Those are definitely things that we look at. We're looking for preferably an upswing, both in rigor and in the grade results.
Just to add to that, I think the one thing to add is the context of the curriculum and the rigor. So based on how many honors, AP courses, and things like that a school offers, we want to see something reflected about that on the transcript as we evaluate. Specifically for Trinity, while we do look at GPA, we do focus more on the specific letter grades themselves, and on the classes that you're taking. So if you go on our website, you actually won't see a reported average GPA. We tend to use letter grades because across the country, you have everything from your 4.0s to your 12.0s out in New Jersey, and it'll be really hard for us to be able to judge, that across the country. So just something else to add.
Thank you, Damien. And I'm Stephanie from Northeastern, and I'd also like to add rigor is very, very important. So we look at two things when we look at transcript: the strength of your program and your grades. And Damien mentioned, most of us, I'm assuming, look at these things within the context of what's offered at your school. So I have an example for you, Paly's profile, and all of us will get a profile of your high school as part of the application process. And we will see right away that Paly offers 19 AP courses and 13 honors classes. So if we see a student who has taken one AP course, we're going to feel that that student did not take a very challenging curriculum. So it's always in the context, and do know that there are some schools, as you probably are aware, that don't offer APs, and so we don't want to penalize those students, so we're aware of those kinds of things. So we're very, very careful. We also recalculate. We are one of the schools that recalculates all of our GPAs, so everybody from across the whole country is on a level playing field.
That's good.
Great.
Yeah, one last thing, because this is, as you can tell, there's a lot of information that's going to be shared kind of contextually at each different institution. The one thing I would add is that the transcript is essentially kind of the keeper of all the secrets. So if a student is sharing that they had a rough period in their life where there was a death in the family or an illness or something that just cause them to focus on something other than academics, if it's reflected on the transcript, it usually is, then we can kind of go back and see the correlation between the event and the grades and determine things like grit, things like resiliency, and how you're able to bounce back from those types of setbacks in life as well.
And wouldn't you say, with regard to looking at rigor, that in addition to the context of the high school, it might be in the context of the student, for example, who's experienced some of those setbacks? Great. And it's fair to say that you don't read the transcript in isolation. Do any of your institutions have a minimum GPA for admission, either to the university or to a particular program? Want to speak to that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. I'm Ed Devine from Lafayette College, and we do really look at the application holistically. We will recalculate the GPA, as Stephanie said. We want every student to be on a 4.0 scale. We will typically focus on the 5 disciplines of English, history, science, math, and foreign language. That doesn't mean we don't count other courses, but we look at those 5 core courses taken over a 4-year span. We oftentimes can count up the number of units you've completed. So, for example, a student may take 4 years of foreign language, but they don't have to. We see plenty of students that decide not to take a 4th or even 3rd year of foreign language, but they might take a second math in a particular year or a second science. But we will recalculate that GPA so that everybody can be looked at and considered on that same 4.0 scale. We do not have any minimums for any program. You are admitted to the university. We do have engineering, we do have computer science. Those classes, those majors, we would look to see evidence of interest in your high school curriculum. So it's tough, for example, to see a student that wants to go into engineering who has not completed a math or a science course in their senior year. But there's no minimum course requirement for a major, nor is there any minimum grade point average. When you see our published average GPAs, just understand that they are averages. We love to look at grade trend. We love to see grades on the rise, of course. And many of our students will come in below profile, as we would refer to it. We might say that our average GPA is a 3.7 unweighted, but we will have plenty of students below that 3.7 because they have positive trend or they have this rigor that we've talked about, that challenging curriculum. And it's our job as counselors to know your high school. As Stephanie showcased, we will understand what's offered here, and we will only expect that you've worked within the context of what's offered in your school.
Anyone on the panel have minimums for? Okay, thank you. I think that's helpful to note even for the public institutions on our panel, because I feel like there are lots of misconceptions out there about minimums not only for eligibility but for admission. Yes?
I might point out that I think students often are self-selecting, and the counselors here at Paly, for example, do a really good job advising you. So you have Naviance, you have a lot of tools so that you can see what was the mid-range GPA at Lafayette last year. And if it's way above your GPA, that doesn't mean you shouldn't apply, but it might give you a sense of reality, what might happen. So I think there's a lot of self-selection in this.
And just along with that too, a GPA is not the only factor. It's one of multiple factors that are considered when we're reviewing an application for admission.
What about senior year grades? Thoughts? How many of you, I mean, I heard Marty said that senior year is important for early and for regular. Would you say that's true of all of your institutions? And any cautions about senior year? I'm speaking because
It does
we have
count.
lots of-
It does count. Don't try to impress us with the curriculum and say, hey, watch this. I'm going to sign up for 5 AP courses and then not produce the results that you should. It is critical. Even our early decision applications, so the deadline for early decision is November 15th. We will reach back to the high school to get either your first quarter grades or first semester grades before releasing even decisions for early decisions. So senior year is critical. A lot of times in committee when we're making tough decisions, you'll hear a committee member say, well, the student made a tough decision for us because they underperformed in their senior year. So you don't want to impress us by taking too much rigor. We won't be impressed by that. You want to follow the guidance of your teachers and your counselors to understand what you can handle. We do get excited to see you bite off a little bit more, challenge yourself a little bit more, but within a reality check. Don't try to come back at us and say, hey, look at this. I took all the hardest courses that Paly offers and then produce that poor GPA. We want to see you, performing at the same level you have through junior year or better. So that senior year is definitely critical.
And only because I've been working with lots of second semester seniors. What about students who choose to drop classes after they're admitted, if they applied early, or right before admissions decisions come out? Because it happens every
I'll take
year.
that one. I will say that it is very important to keep the lines of communication open with your counselors here and then also with the colleges that you're applying to. There needs to be some sort of validating reason for why you're going to drop that particular class, whether that's you may need to pick up extra hours at work to help support the family, or there may be issues with other classes in terms of yourself trying to find some sort of academic balance and where you're not overloading yourself. So hopefully those conversations will take place before you sign up for classes, and so that you don't run into that. But know that sometimes if you do drop a class, it may hurt your admission status with certain schools where they potentially could revoke that admissions letter they sent you.
And I just want to stress certain schools, because even from the schools on this panel, not every school is going to have a negative reaction to you saying, hey, I'm dropping calculus from AP to just regular calculus because it's too much for me to handle based on everything I have going on as my senior year. Some schools are understanding, so communicate that and let us kind of inform you on what those consequences could be.
I'd like to also make this maybe a less negative thing. We certainly don't encourage it, and it can affect your decision. But keep in mind, the reason that we want you to maintain your rigor has to do with your next year. You're going to face a very challenging freshman year in college. And so if you look at it that way, not that you want to have an easy senior year, but that you want to have a senior year that will prepare you to do well your first year in college, that might be a better way of looking at it and a reason to keep challenging yourself and trying to do the best work possible.
And And kind of to go the opposite way from what Ed was describing before, Stephanie, one of the biggest issues that I saw this year for a lot of our students is as I'm reviewing their transcript, I would see, AP Lit in the junior year, Calc AB, whatever the third year, science classes, the third year of language, maybe AP US. And then in the senior year, we have, 2 elective English courses, no math, no science, 1 semester of an elective, social science course and no language. And so the students literally at school for an hour and a half every day. And so to parallel what Stephanie said, it is important, it's crucial because we want to prepare you to be successful in that following year. So the phrase I've heard oftentimes is senior slide, and that they can, sort of lessen the rigor and slide right on into college. That's not really the way it works.
Luckily, at Paly, they have to take at least 5 classes in senior year. But I'll be honest, sometimes there are seniors who either bite off more than they can chew, or if they're admitted early, sometimes are considering dropping things. And I wanted everyone to hear the advice. And that, I think the key takeaway, it's about communication. And that not every school will view it the same way. But communication, being honest and upfront, being really key. What about, we've kind of answered this a little bit, but just to kind of reiterate, how important is it for students to continue with the core subjects in senior year? Clearly, we don't want them to have an hour and a half of school, but I heard Ed say it was okay if they didn't want to take, the 4th year. Are you all kind of in agreement that you don't have to have all the 5 core every year? What do you think?
No, well, I would disagree, basically. We do say that there are certain core subjects where we do require 4 years, and some where we do expect 4 years. So it's on our website, and you can find what those things are. And then there's certain, it did refer to things like the School of Engineering might require physics, chemistry, and calculus. And so you do want to look at each of our website or every single college's website to see what are their requirements. And then I'll take that a step further and advise you not to do the very minimum. Because if you're looking at a selective institution, you're going to be competing against students. If we say 3 years of a foreign language and you think, okay, I can stop there. Probably a lot of our students have taken 4 years of foreign language and probably AP the senior year. So keep in mind that there are minimums, and then there are the things that make you more competitive and open more doors for you.
And I'll disagree with Stephanie because, for example, Miami is a public institution of Ohio. So the Ohio Board of Education sets the requirements for minimum consideration for college admission for all public institutions in the state. Same with every different Board of Education or different state system for colleges across the country. So whatever the minimum requirements that are set by the state of Ohio are what we base on our guidelines. So they're different than they are in California. So like Stephanie said, though, anything that exceeds those minimum requirements is what adds, more of an impressive look to your schedule. So if you're a student whose aptitude is not foreign languages, please don't force yourself to do a 4th year of language and, hate every second of it and end up doing poorly in the class. But if that's an area that you can consider taking a 4th year of Spanish or a 4th year of French or German or Chinese, Japanese, whatever, and you can do well in that class, and it might not be your favorite class, but you can do well in it, that's when you should consider potentially adding it on and keeping that on your schedule throughout your senior year.
I think we just confused you more than you needed to.
My mantra is always rigor within reason, and that every student needs to think about what they're doing outside of the classroom and the rest of their life and sleep as well. So I think
We'll just say that there needs to be a balance of sorts, right? You're not going to just overstuff your curriculum, and because you may not take that 4th year of German or that 5th year of math, doesn't mean that that's the reason why you were disqualified admissions to a particular institution. I would say that we all probably have a holistic evaluation, and so there's more than just that reason why you would be kept off of an admitted student pool. So just keep that in mind.
I usually tell students it doesn't typically come down to one class. This is my least favorite question, but I'm asking it because I get asked it all the time, and the experts are in the room. So here it goes. If you had to choose between getting a C in an honors or AP class and a B in the regular lane, which is better?
Now, you all know the answer, right? The B in the AP class, right? Get the higher grade in the AP class, yeah. It's a trick question. She gets you every year with that. Get the better grade in the higher class. It is good to challenge yourself, but we, I think, want to reiterate that fact that do not try to over-impress us with the courses that are there. We look at how you perform in those courses. Sometimes when we look at, and we'll talk about teacher recommendations, sometimes the grade that you work the hardest for, the one that might be the lowest on your transcript, is the teacher that will tell us the best story about the student that you are. They will describe a student who is resilient, who worked hard to perhaps perform in an area that doesn't come naturally to them. So taking the rigor and performing a little below, perhaps, is okay. But don't overdo it and take too many rigorous courses and not be able to handle that, particularly in that late junior and senior year. But it is good to show challenge. There was a national survey that was done that asked all colleges, what is the #1 criteria? And ranked in order, curriculum was #1, before grade point average. So most schools, regardless of private, state, selective, whatever, they know, and I think Stephanie referred to it, what you're doing here is preparing yourself for the rigors of college. I will happily tell you that our Paly students tell us when they get to campus, I got this. I worked hard in high school, and I'm able to handle the course load in college. That's what you're preparing to do. So pushing yourself with that rigor is okay. Always refer to the teacher before that might lead you into that honors or AP class to make sure you're geared up for it. But challenging yourself, taking that risk, it's advisable, it'll push you, it'll help you learn basic skills like time management, perhaps how to study in new ways, and that will pay dividends in the freshman year. So don't worry or overthink about the GPA and going for that perfect grade point average. We love a little bit of resiliency that is shown through that hard work. And so many of the great teacher recommendation letters are written from that teacher that talks about, here's where the student started at that C-, and here's what they did to get to that B+. And we really appreciated the extra work they put in.
Great. I often get asked this question, so I'm posing it to you, again, the experts. What about Paly's reputation for academic excellence is taken into account when you are evaluating student transcripts? They want to know, are you going to be easier on them because they come from Paly?
Oh, well, that's easy. No, we're not going to be easier, but we love Paly at Northeastern, I think all of us. That's why we're here tonight. This is a very, very busy time, as Sandra mentioned. Some of us have just released decisions, and others of us are scheduled to release them in the next couple of days. So we have great admiration and respect for Paly. It doesn't mean that it's going to be an easier read. It's just that when we're in committees or when individuals are looking at students from Paly, we know this is a school. It's sort of an intangible thing. We know that we can trust that this program is going to be probably a very strong one, and these grades are well-deserved. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I think all of us are aware of Paly, and again, have lots of respect.
Thank you.
We are, and it's nice that Sandra sends us a little kickback for every student that we have. No, she doesn't. We do respect that, and we've seen, all of our schools have history. We know that you work hard here. Really, when you think about college experience, you reflect back on a lot of your freshman year, and a lot of our counselors will talk about, it's managing a caseload, it's time management, and those things are things that you're learning here at Paly. And that's why we're talking about academics. We're focused on that right now, and I know we're going to move away from that in a few minutes, because understand, when we talk about holistic review, we understand the community here. We understand the drive that's within the student body, And we know that you're going to show up and participate and work hard. And that's what's going to make you successful in college beyond anything else. So we will move to that talk pretty soon about beyond academics. But do understand that we know the school, your school profile maps things out. We understand from your counselors the work that you put in here. We see it from standardized tests, the number of students that go on to four-year colleges. So you will get points for working hard, and we know that you'll be prepared for college.
Thank you. I have a few sample transcripts that I'd like to show and just kind of get some feedback from you. I know that some of our families might not have even looked at kind of a transcript, maybe just report cards, but not necessarily everything all together. These are definitely fictitious. But I thought it might be useful to hear, based on your different institutions, what kinds of things stand out and what kind of advice you would have for our students if these are their transcripts. So the first one, oh, it looks like it's cutting off a little bit. My apologies. I'm not sure how to fix that. But in first semester, what you can't see is that in 9th grade, the student earned a D in world history and then repeated it, had a C in English, a B in science, a B in algebra, an A- in PE, an A in foods. That's where it kind of picks up over here. So the thing that's missing from freshman year, I think, is that D in world history that was later repeated. And then what's missing on the other side in terms of first semester, junior year, U.S. history in first semester, B-, physics B-, geometry B-, American Lit B, Spanish 2C. Hopefully Stephanie Mendoza, other college advisors back there trying to see if she can fix it. But nevertheless, I'm sure you have some thoughts. If you wouldn't mind sharing, that would be great.
So because the grades are just one component for the student, I would say that if all we had to look at was this transcript, my sense is that the student is not very competitive for admission to my school. However, if they are a particularly strong tester, or if they're looking for admission to a talent program where our primary criteria is not academic, I would feel more encouraged, as would I feel more encouraged if the student had something exceptional going on in his or her extracurricular life, or possibly some special circumstances.
I just wanted to point out something that it might be interesting. I'd like to hear what the other members of the panel would say. You see the D, the freshman year, right? If I'm looking at the same one you are.
Yes.
The student, as far as Northeastern is concerned, the student did the right thing in repeating the class. We are one of the schools that would take the second grade over the first one, and that would help with both the GPA, and then we would feel like you understand the concepts of the class. So this student didn't start very well, but do know that this student had a chance. That D wouldn't have harmed him or her necessarily for the rest of the high school, his high school career. But this student unfortunately didn't manage to do much better. The other thing that is glaring here, so again, the first D, we don't like to see it, but we do see it from time to time, and students are still admitted to probably, I would assume, all of our institutions. So again, you can make that up. The last D we see here, not so easy. We see a D in the junior year, and this is where some people might disagree with me, but that's going to leave an impression on us, frankly. It doesn't mean you're not going to be admitted, but it will be something, it's sort of like the trend. It's something that is, we're going to be very, very well aware of and feel like, is this student prepared for a college career?
And this is one of those cases where if there is a bit of context, if there's a reason, a factor that's causing your grades to look like this, where you share that with us. Because again, without context, just looking at the grades and course selection, it doesn't look all that positive. But if there's something motivating those choices or something motivating the results here, if we know that, then we can better understand, like, Oh, yeah, so that makes total sense why you would perform this way this semester or this time, because this other thing happened that impacted your academic performance. So keep that in mind as well.
In a very weak senior year, only 3 solid courses, algebra, lit, and economics. So with the GPA under 3.0, that sort of, Sandra, I didn't know you were going to put my transcript up on the screen there, but
Right. That's awesome. And I think they raise a really good point, that transcripts are not typically look like this in isolation, right? But nevertheless, I appreciate your feedback. And a reminder that how it might turn out will depend on the kind of selectivity of the institution as well. So know that if for some of these institutions the student might not be admitted, that doesn't mean there's not a place for this student. Because I assure you, there are students who have this transcript and are going to four-year college. So that hopefully relieves some stress. The second transcript, I don't know if you found anything you wanted to kind of highlight there. I apologize that for those of you in the audience, this is difficult to hear, but I'm hoping that the comments are still super useful. Thanks.
I would say about the second transcript, and again, just comes back to context, what the school offers and what the student is taking. It's very glaring initially looking at this that the student's only taking 1 honors, there's zero APs, and if the school that the student is attending, if that's the case where they don't offer any type of AP or honors program, then that's absolutely fine. But if it's sort of a curriculum that Paly offers with 19 and 13 honors, I think it was, then this will look very different in that sense. But they performed well, but just not in very rigorous.
And I also think another bit of context, and this may or may not hold true for all of us depending upon how we read, is that I would want to know what this student's major was and what their intended program of study was. Because if I look at this transcript and let's say, for example, that the school this student number 2 attends doesn't offer any AP courses, I look at this and I do see calculus in the senior year, love to see the lit classes, physics in their junior year. This is someone who I could say, yes, we could consider him competitive for computer science, for our pre-engineering program, business or finance, things like that. But I think the intended program of study is another big piece of the proverbial puzzle.
yeah, that's a great point. And the other bit of context too, this student has the 5 core disciplines of English, math, science, history, and foreign language. Additionally, 3 years of theater. At Lafayette, we have a theater major. We do have a big, we support the arts. So we would add that to the student's curriculum. We would say that that student had 23 units because we would give credit for the theater. If we saw a student that wanted to pursue theater as a minor or a major, that could be some great information for us to know and understand this context that didn't have the extreme rigor that some of the students might have. This student might cleanly fit into our class because of that passion for theater.
Fantastic. Any comments about the third transcript?
I'll comment that for Rutgers, this student that we're looking at now has kind of moved more into the zone of being competitive for admission to a variety of our schools. And we're a school, we're a university that admits separately by school, so we have different admission criteria depending on what school the student is applying to. So for this student, I thought that they looked like kind of reachy in terms of if they wanted to be one of our professional schools, like say business, engineering, pharmacy. However, they looked pretty solid for our School of Arts and Sciences or environmental biological sciences. So.
Perfect.
Yeah, this student is definitely starting to add the rigor. They have that 21-unit curriculum with 4 APs. So that's a very nice transcript. The student didn't go overboard with taking more than they could handle. There's a slight drop in GPA their fall of junior year. But other than that, they've got nice rigor. They've hit challenge in calculus their senior year and psychology. So they're adding that rigor to the curriculum as they go, but handling and doing what they can do. Performing at that 3.5 GPA, they're kind of in their wheelhouse. So this is a nice looking transcript that's starting to add the rigor that many of our schools will look for.
I will say that they would probably, the performance in that final year being consistent with what they were doing previously is going to be important. So getting that first quarter grade if you're applying ED, seeing that those grades are still the same, or even for that first semester if you're applying regular decision.
Great. And the last transcript?
Yeah, we'll take that, kid.
One thing I'd just like to point out, I love recalculating GPAs. I'm one of the few people on the staff that just loves that. So I took the time to recalculate this based on how Northeastern would recalculate this GPA. And are you guys showing a 3.6? Am I looking at the right one? 3.684? That actually would show up as a 4.1 for Northeastern, because we do give weight for honors and even additional weight for AP classes. So do know that this is an example of where a challenging curriculum and good grades can really, both of them, can add up to a pretty nice GPA.
So I feel like I keep rebutting you. No, it's okay. No, so I love that you gave that example with how Northeastern would recalculate the GPA, because at Miami, our policy is to take the GPA directly from the transcript. So in this case, the GPA is reported as a cumulative 3.68. So that's the GPA the student would have when we're reviewing within the context of the high school. So you can see how the same information can be looked at so very differently across institutions, which is why it's important for you to ask any admission counselor for any school that your students are considering, how is my GPA going to be used? That's not a trade secret. We will gladly tell you that information so that way you know how to expect the review of your application to look.
And I just want to reiterate a comment that was made earlier, that while some institutions will recalculate and others won't, even more important than the GPA I heard are the actual courses and the grades in those specific courses. It's not like you're just looking at the GPA and moving on.
And sorry, I was just going to say quickly, I apologize, I did do my homework.
Oh, please.
And as I maybe mentioned before, I've recalculated 1,000 files this year, so I didn't really feel like doing this again. So I did one semester, but in the recalculation process at Providence, the overall GPA here would probably be more like a 3.55 to a 3.6, so just slightly lower than what you see printed here. However, with 8 honors and 7 AP classes, if this was a Paly student, our strength of curriculum rating, we call it the SOC, basically goes from a 5 to a 10. And if this was a student coming out of Paly, they would have a 10 SOC. And with the grades as is, that would certainly be someone we'd invite to the class.
So a 10 for the academic rigor, yet the GPA would be calculated a little bit lower.
Yeah.
Fascinating. I love it.
And again, I guess we all do these things, of course, differently. But just to get into more detail, University of California and Cal State, I believe, now correct me if I'm wrong, give the same weight for APs and honors. Is that correct?
Not all
No?
honors.
Okay.
Certain designated honors.
Designated honors, okay. And so this is an area where sometimes our GPA is going to be higher or lower than Paly's or any other school in California, because we give a 0.5 weight for honors and a 0.4 AP. So all of us probably have different systems for those of us who do recalculate GPAs. But I often share this, if you don't mind, with students when I see them in the fall about how crazy this whole GPA thing can be. And I share this with some of my fellow dinner partners tonight. So I saw GPA, some of us are backup readers for high schools in other states, and I'm responsible for Northern California and the Northwest, but I was reading something maybe in the Midwest or the South, I believe, and a student reported a 4.5 grade point average, and I look at that and think, oh, I can't wait to see this transcript. This is going to be pretty impressive. And I noticed there were all C minuses on that transcript. And I didn't understand what was going on. I finally realized this was a 10-point scale that this school was using. And so this is really, this really can be a science, looking at all these different GPAs that people report. And so I guess the lesson that you can take away from this is it's just part of everything we look at, and we all do things, most of us do things differently. So If you're really interested in a certain number of schools, make sure you look up the way they do things. And one last thing, we're all regionals, I think. So we're based in this on the West, and we love talking to you. We love talking to your counselors. So don't hesitate to pick up the phone and say, this is what I'm reading on the profile. Can you tell me more about this? And so you've got actual professionals who can answer your questions. So I just want to let you know we are accessible.
And my last little mantra is what I tell the juniors all the time, is that GPA is relative. And so rather to be hyper-focused on GPA, what's actually going to serve students better is to challenge themselves within reason, rigor within reason, and control what they can control. They can't control how the GPA is recalculated or not. That's something that happens at the admissions office. But they have control over course selection and performance to a certain degree. And to kind of, instead of being worried about the stuff you can't control, to kind of focus on enjoying, challenging yourself, learning, and focus on that part of your education. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to standardized testing. So, if you could talk a little bit about the role that standardized testing, particularly SAT and ACT, plays in your admission process, that would be useful. And I know we have at least one test optional college on the panel. If you could talk a little bit about that. And we might have more than one. Okay, great. Thanks. If you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about standardized testing.
I love testing.
Yes.
Do you want to start?
Go ahead. Okay. So at Providence, we are test optional. So if you do not want to submit your SAT or ACTs, you do not have to. We do not ask for anything in lieu of tests, so there are no additional essays in lieu of standardized test scores, things like that. And again, while I just said we are test optional, we are not test blind. So if you do send them, we can see them.
And can't unsee them.
And can't unsee them is probably the most important thing. So if you look on our website and you see where our mid-ranges are, and you say, wow, my SATs are 150 points higher than their top 25%, then great, submit them. If you fit right in the middle, good. If you're in that bottom quarter or underneath where the bottom 25% of our test submitters are located, then you might not want to submit them.
We're a test optional at Trinity College as well, and so the way how we articulate that policy. So we went test optional in 2015, and we just sort of looked at it as tests doesn't really tell us more about a student than what we typically see in a transcript. And so we very much value the transcript than we do the test scores. But as Marty said, if those test scores do come in, we can't unsee them, but we will only accept official score reports. And so if you happen to mistakenly have left the test scores on your Common App or somehow they're pasted onto the transcript, we won't count those as official until an official score report comes in. And if we do send scores into Trinity, we look at both the subject exam as well as the SAT and the ACT. Those are the three different options students can submit to us.
Yeah, at Lafayette, we experimented with test optional a number of years ago. We reintroduced the tests, particularly because of our science faculty. They saw correlation between certain tests and performance in school. So we've brought it back into the admissions process, but we still remember the conversation of what if the tests weren't here. So we'll commonly ask that question or look at the tests within kind of reason, but probably academically, curriculum first, grade point average, trend, and then testing. We look at either ACT or SAT. We will superscore both, and we will take the best of either the SAT or ACT. We've seen more ACT submitters over the past years, and I think that's a nationwide trend that has really been taking shape over the past few years. So we're open to either test. We really don't need to see students go crazy and take it more than 2 or 3 times. A lot of times, the first time you should be taking it for real would be sometime in the spring of your junior year, maybe closing that out in fall. But claim it, own it, don't worry about the test score. if you want to prove to us or talk about the fact that that's just a test, we will get that and understand it. Our average ACT, as an example, is about a 30, but we've worked with it, and I've personally worked with students well below profile, 9 or 10 points below profile. Everything else is strong. They do lean in and do show demonstrated interest and do interviews to kind of offset that, but it is part of our conversation. But again, it is the third ranked factor in the admissions or numbers part of it.
Do any of you, I asked minimum GPA, are there any of your institutions that have minimum test score requirements? Great. Do you prefer, because this is a question I get a lot, SAT versus ACT? Any preference?
Typically prefer whatever you're better at.
Great. And just to round out this discussion, do your institutions super score? So if the students take the same exam more than once, are you willing to take the best out of different sections of different test administrations?
Yes, we are. And one thing, I don't know if everybody does this, a computer actually does it for us. And when I'm looking at, and we read online, and when I'm looking at a student's file, I will simply see the best score there. And I want to really stress that because I think some students are so afraid because they took the test, whatever it might be, second time, they did better in one section, but they did worse in another. So they don't want to they're afraid to send that. For a school, I don't know about all of the rest of you, but a school who super scores, typically we just see the best grades. So when I see students at the high schools, I'll say send everything. Trust us to make the decision that's going to be in your favor. Anybody else do things differently or something?
Well, the only thing I would say that Rutgers does differently is we'll super score the SAT but not the ACT. And agreed.
You are kidding. Wow. All right.
Thousands of dollars in scholarship money. So I think in small doses, those can certainly be good.
Yeah, I think sometimes students take for granted what they do and are kind of modest. At the same time, we don't want every little activity, right? But sometimes, there's a range, and I have definitely worked with students. I'm like, why didn't you tell me that sooner? That's kind of a big deal. So I agree. For the record, I would say the vast majority of Paly students do not submit supplementary letters. Because the rule of thumb is that that person needs to know you in a different capacity and have something to say that hasn't been said elsewhere in the application. And at Paly, our teacher advisors get input not only from the student and their parent, but also what we call short forms, which are paragraphs written from a coach or the community service coordinator and so on. And so sometimes that information makes it into the recommendation other places. I tell students if you're thinking about a supplementary letter, you definitely don't want a short form from that same person because you want to avoid redundancy. It's pretty rare at Paly. Okay, let's talk a little bit about college essays. Any advice for students? Maybe some of our juniors who are thinking ahead to summer or fall?
So, here's the biggest tip I can give you guys. There's this perceived notion that the college essay has to be about this grand experience that only you have had. And here's the thing. American high school students have very similar experiences across the country. And that's okay. So a lot of people feel like maybe writing about sports or writing about, something that they do that they really care about is kind of a bad idea. It's only a bad idea if you write a bad essay about it. If it's something that's really specific to you and who you are and how you identify as a student and as an individual, there's ways of telling that story and sharing that part of your identity in a way that's super unique. And that's another thing. You don't have to be the most memorable, unique essay, because typically those essays are either like the incredible ones that like make me cry, or the ones that are so bad I laugh at them as I'm reading them. And don't aspire for those. You know, as long as I can read it and learn about you, and kind of get a sense of what your voice is like, what your personality is like, what your character is like, then you've done a good job. You've written a good essay.
Yeah, I would agree. One of my favorite exercises as students start thinking about the essay is kind of some journaling, but write 3 adjectives that describe you. Or maybe even ask your family or friends, what are 3 ways you would describe me? And then think of how you tell us or show us that story. All right, you don't have to tell us and say over and over again, I'm very responsible. I am a totally responsible person. I am responsible. Show us that responsibility. I had a student recently that just wrote a great essay about a part-time job she had at the mall. And she took us to the scene where she was on Tuesdays and Thursday nights closing the cupcake shop that she worked in. So she told the story of shutting off the cupcake maker. I don't know what you bake those in. Shutting the lights off and locking the door. That showed me responsibility. At some point, I pulled back and said, somebody trusted her enough to give her that key and that responsibility. So her idea of being responsible, being mature, was shown in a common story about a part-time job that she had. It wasn't anything that blew us away as far as her experience, although I do love cupcakes, so I got a few out of her. But it was that simple story of something that she did every day, and it took us into this kind of world of who she was by letting us know on Tuesdays and Thursdays now I know that 3 or 4 hours a night, she's working at the mall, and that somebody has since imparted that trust for her to kind of go off and shut down the shop. So kind of think about who you are, the things that you can teach us about yourself in ways that stuff plays out.
I'll take it to the most basic level. Make sure you answer the question that you decide to pick. I kid you not, sometimes people just start writing and then, oh, well, what question did I answer here? And they decide to put up a question there. So making sure you answer the question, or pick a question or a prompt that is very meaningful to you, that will be able to get those adjectives sort of answered, I think is going to be important. The showing and not just telling piece is also very important, which was just mentioned as well. So those are probably the 2 things I would say. And then just sort of the structure of the writing, being that we are very much a writing-intensive school where I work at Trinity, we require students to take, I believe it's 3 or 4 writing courses within their first 2 years on our campus. And so that part of the application really helps us sort of talk about whether the student's ready to take that on our campus.
And I hope the one thing you noticed from what everyone here has said over and over again is that this written piece of work needs to be about you. This is not a college essay. This is a personal statement. So I'm sorry, but forget the whole college essay thing. This is a personal statement about you. And as Damien said, please answer the question. And I know we're sort of joking about this, but it drives us crazy, so we're sad and laughing about it. But please answer the question and make sure it relates back to you. And as Julio said, it doesn't have to be this sort of grandiose, life-changing event. And I really hope that most 17-year-olds haven't had to deal with something really that earth-shattering. So I used to tell people there are a couple of things that you should avoid. I still think there are 2 things. I think high school romance is something we don't need to know about. And I apologize in advance for this, and I had 2 of these this year. Bodily functions.
Wow.
Just not that I need to know about you, but I don't need to know that about you. So I'll stop there.
And just, I like to kind of set the expectation. A lot of people have a fear of writing a bad essay. I'm going to give you an example of what I deem as like the worst essay I've ever read. It was a student who wrote about how much she enjoyed shoplifting and was looking to go to college to travel. You're not going to get anywhere near that. Guarantee you.
Can you talk a little bit about extracurricular activities and what role they play in the admission process? And The question I get asked a lot are these two. Are some activities better than others? I get that asked all the time. Is working better than continuing to play X sport? I get that a lot. What was I going to say? Oh, thoughts about community service. I would say at Paly we have a real culture of community service. We don't require it. And yet, that's the other question I get. Well, should I do more? I need to do more and more community service. So, thoughts about activities, the roles they play, and then if you have any comments about which activities are more valuable or not.
It's one of the things that we really love about the transcript is the activities resume. If you start looking at the Common App, understand it's very limited in what you can put into that format. It'll ask you to put in a title, a description. Each one of those are about 140 characters, so it is limited. But then importantly, that's going to ask you the hours you do it per week and the number of weeks per year. We are curious about that. We literally, every year, all of us see somebody that says, I donate blood, 1 hour for 365 days. So that's great that you donate blood, but it probably should not make your activities list because that didn't really soak up a lot of time. What we're asking about is how you manage your time. So when we look at your high school career, that grade point average that you earned, in what context is that? Where are your other responsibilities? How are your time management skills? There's another part on the Common Application. Do you want to continue this? And we get excited to see that. Much like we deliver students to the teachers, to our professors, we deliver leaders and campus participants to our student community. So we're curious to see what you participate in. Don't leave tonight, because we all see this. Started 11th grade right after junior night. Started 11th grade right after junior night. Join the German club, 12th grade. Show passion for what you like. Pursue your passions. Be creative. Understand what you do. Kind of jot it down. It's better to have a list of things that go beyond and then trim it down. A lot of times your parents will say things like, oh, remember that you won the three-legged race in 3rd grade. Put that down. There's at some point, like 8th grade and beyond, we don't need to know that. But really be inclusive and think, and I think we've talked about it, stretch to understand family responsibilities, caring for younger siblings. You might be the first one home in your family, and you have to cook macaroni and cheese for your younger siblings. That's important. Caring for a grandparent. Home responsibilities, job responsibilities. Those things are important to let us know how you manage time and where you show and handle responsibility. We often all talk about leadership. We love to see students that persist in certain activities, but get up to that point of taking on an ownership, a leadership role. You don't have to be the president of the class. You don't have to be the leader of every organization, but show that you've matured within the context of some of the things that you're doing. But we really do get excited about what you're doing, and it's not the number of hours. There's no magic formula. There's no algorithm that says, do this, this, and this, and you're going to get accepted. But pursue that passion. Be creative with what you list from the summertime, with what you list from family events. Travel, for example, is a great thing to share with us. But if you feel compelled, and many students will start working on a resume within a Word document format. Sometimes they do that just to get it on paper. You can upload that through Common App. We will look at that. Understand that you will still fill out the Common App grid. That's key. That's critical. But it's a great piece to take with you, too, if you ever go on college interviews. Bring your resume. What you've just done is showed me, number one, you're prepared. Number two, you've taken control of the conversation. Because I'm going to look at your resume and say, well, tell me about your Gold Award. That's a question you should be able to answer. If I've got nothing, I'm going to ask you tougher questions. So there's no magic amount. There's no better programs, but we love to see balance, commitment to community, school, and family.
And I'd agree totally with Ed. One thing you might want to know is that we're all human in the admissions, in all of our admissions offices, and we all perhaps have our biases about what activities we think are more important than others. I might like musicians, and somebody else on my committee might like debaters. And I had a student, a new staff member, who gave me a lesson on how important DECA is, and ever since then I've much more appreciated DECA. So do know that really, I think it's just what you're passionate about. Don't try to think, if you don't like playing a musical instrument, then maybe that's not for you. We'll look at everything, as Ed said. For some people, it's working. For other people, it is debate. Other people, they have played in, well, a lot of people now go to Carnegie Hall. But we'll look at everything. We just want to make sure that you're going to be an involved student, an engaged student when you come to our universities. And so what you do isn't so much important as that you're doing what you enjoy.
Can I give one pet peeve
Yes.
briefly? And I am a nice person. I hope that everybody doesn't think I'm the big meanie on the panel. But there are 24 hours in a day. The average work week is 40 to 50 hours per week. So while for every application, I obviously none of us have time to do this, but some applications do stand out when I see, okay, this student's working, volunteering, walking dogs, rescuing puppies from burning buildings, 97 hours a week. Oh, and they're going to school too. So just be cognizant of sort of how many hours you're writing down per activity and things like that.
What do you, because this is another question, what about students who drop activities? Like, do they need to stick with something for 4 years? Are you expecting that they try a lot and then kind of hone in? There are students who will say to me, well, I'm taking band again, but I don't necessarily love band, but I heard it's really good to do it for 4 years.
Please don't do anything arbitrarily. Like that's you're trying. If you're trying to do something to impress a college admission officer, we all went to high school too. Like we're not going to be impressed. You should be doing these activities because it's you're taking your time and dedicating it to doing something else outside of going to school. So don't feel like you're trying to impress us or trying to game the system somehow. If you drop an activity, there's typically a reason why, and you can probably share, like, stopped playing band 10th grade to focus on my academics, or whatever motivation you had. Share that. That's totally fine. You're human. We drop out of stuff all the time too.
No, keep playing. If you have a concussion, get back in there. Rub some dirt on it. No, I think Julio brought up a great point. There is a part of the common application called additional information, and it's a funny, often misused aspect of the application, sometimes not used enough. But a lot of students have 2 essays they love, and they're like, oh, I'm just going to drop my second essay in here. Don't do that. Additional information is factual things that have happened. So if you want to take us to a why you dropped a particular endeavor, let us know. If there's good reason to do it, beyond I'm lazy and I wanted to nap more, or I was trying to get to the next level of Tetris, is that a game? But it's okay. It's okay to try things, find out what you don't like. That's going to continue in college as well. So don't feel like you need to push on and continue everything for that 4 years. You can let us know, and there are oftentimes very solid, legitimate reasons that are spelled out nicely, and we don't hold that against the student.
Great. You alluded to some of them. Are there any other common errors that students make in their application that you would like to caution them against?
If you're still using your 3rd grade email address, you might want to change that now as you prepare for college applications. Other thing, proofreading your writing, very important, whether you have a chance to look at it and then probably ask a parent, ask a counselor, ask a friend. That's probably one of my biggest pet peeves is when I'm going through pieces of writing, it looks like they just kind of woke up in the middle of the night, started writing away. It's not necessarily just a brain dump onto paper. It's it's something that you're submitting here for official consideration for admissions.
Yeah, Microsoft Word is an amazing program, and I know I'm in the heart of Silicon Valley, so I should probably say that louder. But I can't echo this enough to proofread your materials, because there is nothing really more depressing to me when I get to the end of a very, very well-written essay or the end of a very well-written supplemental statement and find out why the student thinks they'll be such a great fit at Holy Cross. I'm like, oh. Yeah, you had me until the very end. So, have someone, a friend you trust, your parent, your counselor, proofread all that information for you.
And I'd also like to add, and Marty kind of alluded to it, you don't, I think some students are way too humble. And I don't know if it's because you can't fit your activities into the activity section correctly. It's sort of a red flag when you see someone like Marty's student who has one activity. And then you find out it was an Eagle Scout, there were all these things going on, and then we wonder, was the student too lazy? Did this not mean enough to the student not to list it? Or we could have totally not admitted the student because there was only one activity. So please, this is where I often would say, again, have other people look at your common application and your activities. And they may say, but what about this that you did? So we want it, this is your chance to tell your story and show us why you should be accepted to our institution. So please don't be too humble. But I also just have a couple housekeeping things that you probably mention all the time. Please make sure we have the correct email address all of the time. Some of you may change this is how we correspond with you, through email, at least Northeastern, we're behind the times, I guess, but through emails and through student portals. So we've had students who have we've dropped their applications and they've said, well, I never knew that I needed to do that. Well, they might have changed their email and never told us. So really important to check your emails and check your student portals once you apply to an institution. Normally, this is the way many of us, will communicate with you. And so if you either never open or create a student portal for yourself, or you don't check it periodically, you're never going to know what's missing. You're never going to know some really important things about your application. So please check your portals. And then the last thing I'd written here was make sure that your name on the tests like the SAT or ACT are exactly the same as the names that are on your common application. We're constantly we tell students we're missing items. Students think that they were sent, and it turns out there simply could have been an error in the way you either spelled your name or between listing it differently on two different forms. So please those are, again, pure house cleaning things, but they can really create some anguish later on.
Yeah, definitely, and to reiterate that, it's your job to make sure your application is complete, and we do it differently, we notify you differently, there is a lot to manage there, but take that responsibility to watch that portal. Most of them are very visually appealing now. You see a green arrow checkbox if it's in and a red X if it's not, so make sure applications are complete. I just want to touch a little bit on the supplemental writing as well. We talked about the essay and the recommendations, but a lot of the schools on the Common App will open up to what's called supplemental writing. That's a question that we will ask you that's specific to our school. Answer those questions specifically, understanding that if you don't want to apply to too many schools because you can't deeply connect with that many schools as you go through the process. One of the big questions to ask yourself through this process, we interview a ton of our students. One of the questions I will stump so many students on, why do you want to go to college? And they don't have, if you don't have a great answer to that, it's tough to kind of move forward in the process. The next thing we ask on our supplement, why our school? Why Lafayette? Be prepared to tell us why. And the why is not everything I know about Lafayette. I know that we have Division I sports, we're an hour from New York, and that we are in Easton, blah, blah, blah. I know all that stuff. Why do you want to fit into Lafayette? Let us know through that writing what in your history will connect deeply to our school. Major, clubs, organizations, the size of the school. And if you've been to our campus, let us know. A great opening line to the supplemental writing is, I fell in love with the campus when I visited. Not all of our students visit, but if you can convey that in our supplemental writing, then watch out for that. When I ask juniors, right, what are they worried about? Testing and then essay. When I ask our freshmen what to tell you, watch out for the supplements. So as you look ahead to those additional writing samples, they're short, 250 words. The two questions we ask, why our school, why Lafayette? And the other one, why do you do what you do? What's your motivation? So be prepared to answer those supplemental questions to help show us that you will fit in at our school. Because here's a secret. In April of your senior year, listening to your counselors, you will have 6, 7, 8, or 9 acceptances. You've got all the power at the end of this process to make a decision from one of those schools. Convince us that that choice will be us, and we'll get excited to admit you.
Perfect. Thanks for adding that. I really appreciate it. Wanted to move on into like the actual application review admission process. Well, one of my first questions was kind of what's the most important admissions factor when you evaluate applications? I would say that you've sort of answered that by talking about looking at the courses first, and then from there, rigor, grades, GPA. Anything else you want to say about being kind of the most important in the application review? I didn't think so. No, seriously, thank you. Can you talk to us a little bit about the actual, like when you're looking at applications, are you reading the entire application beginning to end and then kind of forming an impression of it? Or are you kind of evaluating and ranking or giving weight to certain things? Can you tell us, give us behind the veil, tell us a little bit about the inner workings.
So I think everyone has a different approach when reading an application. Those of you who have participated in case study programs, you've seen how much information can be in one of those applications. And I know I always get this question, like, how long does it take you to read an application when I'm doing one of those case study programs? And I mean, everyone takes a different amount of time based on the institutional priorities and how they evaluate applications. So personally, based on how we read at Miami, it's anywhere from 8 to 12 minutes on average with an application, but that's because I know exactly what I have to look at. I don't have to go through and find all the pieces of information within the application because sometimes it's all pre-populated, so I can focus specifically on the transcript, the curriculum, the essay, and how all those things kind of play together. So it's kind of very much individualized, even within offices of admission.
Yeah, we will go through, we do add a lot of rankings. So we will rank things like your curriculum, we will rank your GPA, we will rank your testing. That's called the academic rankings. I'll get to that later. That's the academic side. The other side is the personal qualities. We will rank things like get an academic rating of 1. Highest testing, highest GPA. Their academics, the calculus part of this, would get them into any school in the country. We don't admit 100% of those. We only admit about 72% of the students with perfect or that 1 ranking in academics. Because that's not the only thing that's important to us. That fit and that connection through the personal qualities can rise up and take that. But those are the main things that we will add rankings to as we spend probably about 20 minutes for a first read on an application. A second reader will spend about 5 minutes on an application. And then many of the students will end up in committee before final decisions are made. And all of those rankings will be discussed, but so too will the student in their entirety.
So we're pretty.
Yeah, it is.
So we are pretty similar to Lafayette in that sense. The only other thing, and I think we'll discuss this in a little bit, is demonstrated interest, and that's something that's starting to play a role in college admissions. And so that's also another rating that we look at as we go through that application. And so where Ed mentioned earlier the supplemental essay, how detailed that essay is really shows us how the student is connecting with our school. And so if you have students who are applying to schools with these supplemental essays, making sure that they are writing those in a very concise and very detailed manner.
Not to sound like a broken record, but very, very similar process with regard to an academic rating. We also rate a couple of other things. We have what's called your leadership rating, basically on a scale of 1 to 3, and what sort of leadership have you shown throughout your years in high school. We also have a counselor rating, which is more sort of a personal, pretty subjective rating that we give, and sort of what sort of vibe, what sort of feel did we get from the application, what was the voice coming from the essay and the transcripts, from the recommendations, things like that. So again, that counselor rating on an individual basis. The other big thing, just to sit back a little bit, is we do also, our committee is very, very interested in students fit to major, what we call fit to major. And so is there something in your activities list that says, for example, if you're interested in one of our education programs, we really hope to see some service projects where you've worked with children, things like that. But pretty similar, I think, to Ed and to Damien, as the rest of my colleagues as well. For us, I'd say my first reads are probably 20 to 25 minutes to recalculate the GPA and then write up all my notes. And then the second read are probably, 5 to 7 minutes on the second read.
Just because we've heard mostly from private institutions answering that question to the public schools, do you want to tell us a little bit? I mean, is there a committee kind of practice?
So what I can chime in and say is that our evaluation, a couple of different things happen. So for many students so parts of our evaluation are quite old school and very numerical, very much about the curriculum, the GPA, the test scores. So about half of the group, if you will, to us is going to be a clear admit, right? And then we have sort of a group of students who perhaps doesn't quite hit our quantitative criteria, but we see something in the application that merits an extra level of review. Similarly, at the higher end, where we have students whose quantitative criteria clearly sort of exceeds or is in the, that top band, those are the students we look at more closely for honors college and scholarship opportunities. So it's a combination of sort of numerical statistical pieces and a more detailed qualitative review as appropriate. It's a mixture.
Yeah, and with our review process, when I'm reading an application, we do score the curriculum and how students are performing in that. But we also, outside of just like the traditional reading, we do have committee review as well. So throughout any round of admission, if there's a student who is sharing a compelling story or who is showing something that maybe on paper doesn't necessarily register all that well, or someone that we met on the road and got to know pretty personally, that's a space for us to advocate specifically for those students and give them a shot at being admitted to our institution as well. So there's lots of different kind of entry points for us to add that advocacy for students.
Great. You sort of alluded to this, but the next question was, do you admit students based on major? In general, I think I heard Rutgers say yes for some pre-professional programs.
We admit by school, not by major within a school, with the exception of the talent programs. You're admitted to dance, you're
Sure.
admitted to visual art, et cetera. And pharmacy, there is only one major in pharmacy. Nursing, there is only one major in nursing, but otherwise, when a student is admitted to a school, period, not to biotech or accounting or whatever.
I guess what I'm trying to get at it is, well, two things. You mentioned like some of the extracurriculars, how do they align with what the area of interest is? Are they being admitted by the major? Not to say that they couldn't change it, but are they being admitted by major? And for example, then would there be a benefit or a deficit to go undeclared? And is that even an option at your school?
Yeah, for us, I think I can speak for a few of us here that we, at least at Providence, are sort of what we refer to as single door admission. So that if you're admitted to the institution, once you're admitted, then if you meet certain criteria, you can go pretty much to any program that you're interested in. And for us, there is no sort of deficit or there's no red flag if a student applies undeclared or undecided. That's not a problem to us.
Northeastern is like Marty's institution, Providence. Again, as I mentioned earlier, engineering. I have some specific requirements like physics, chemistry, and calculus for any of your potential engineers in the room. Our College of Art, Media, and Design does require a portfolio. So in a sense, we don't admit by major, but we might have requirements for a major. But as Marty said, we admit the students, and then somebody high above looks at all the students we want to admit, and then if we have 150 majors at Northeastern, somebody's got to decide, have we admitted too many computer science students? Have we admitted, in terms of students we would want to admit? And so in this sense, your major could affect, at Northeastern anyway, this wasn't this way in the past, but it's becoming more this way as we are receiving more applications. You're not admitted to a major, but your major could impact whether or not you're ultimately admitted, just based on how many applications we get each year for similar majors. So does that make sense? And just lastly, students often do ask, is it better, or what are impacted majors? And what do you guys say, on the East Coast, I don't often use the term impact
California thing.
So, a California thing. So I don't know if any of us have really impacted majors, but I think it's if you want to call it the market out there, drives the applications that are coming in. Right now, computer science is very, very popular, and so is the college of science, all the STEM areas. And we often see these things go in cycles. We can't always predict that. So I will always give the advice, apply to the major that you are the most interested in and dedicated to, and let the chips fall where they may.
Great. Let's see. There's often a myth or a misconception that somehow there is a limit to the number of students from any particular high school that you'll admit. For example, you could not admit more than X students from Paly in any given year. True or false?
Absolutely true. No, just kidding. No. False.
False. False.
Great, thank you. On the other hand, another question that I get asked a lot is, I asked in looking at the transcript, do you consider Paly, can that make a difference? The other kind of Paly-specific question I get has to do with, I guess not special consideration necessarily because you've gone to Paly. You talked about that they're well prepared, but in the admission review, okay, the GPA from this student at Paly is a little bit lower. I would argue that there's grade deflation here. And is that something that you notice? For example, might you be willing to dip a little bit lower than your range for a Paly student as opposed to another student that you have historical data where there might be grade inflation at their school? Is that something you think about?
So, it's something that we're aware of, like the trends as far as grade inflation and grade deflation. Like, there are certain schools that each of us have relationships with that we know, like, oh yeah, everyone, like, if the mid 50% of the senior class has a 3.9 and higher, it's like, well, there might be something going on there, where everyone's getting such generous grades, and we act accordingly. Like, we understand that like a 3.9 at that school isn't really like a 3.9 everywhere else. Essentially, it's comparing apples and oranges, but there's never a consideration where like, we know this school's stronger, so we're going to go ahead and just dip a little bit lower, because really it's understanding that it's a competitive academic environment. The grades that you're achieving are still good grades because you're doing the best you can in that competitive environment. And there's so many other factors that are considered that we don't just kind of give a pass, essentially, because you go to a certain school. We typically get that question a lot from a lot of private schools, too, who say, like, oh, well, we have, such an advanced curriculum. It's like, well, sure, but you're not the only school with an advanced curriculum out there. And so we can't operate that way, essentially.
Thank you. Let's see. I think you've kind of answered a couple of my other questions already. One, I was going to ask you about students who drop classes after they've been admitted. We kind of covered that. The other was to kind of describe the reading and review process and the amount of time. You've talked about that. You also mentioned that oftentimes there are more than one reader. I think that's useful information for folks to know. The role of presenting at committee, it sounded like, was for students who have more of a story. Anything else you want to add about just the review process before we kind of move on? Cool, I thought so too. Okay, so special considerations. So this is kind of where I want to ask you about demonstrated interest and what role that plays in admission or scholarship. If you could talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, we're a school that would really value the demonstrated interest, and it's your ability to kind of connect with us through the process. We talked about the supplement, letting us know that you find a deep connection to our school. Again, it might be based on major, it might be based on our career service center, it might be based on what our graduates do, but it might be based on a club that we have on campus. So that ability to lean into us throughout the process is key. We spend a lot of time in California. We do a lot of work here visiting the high schools, hosting events. So the opportunity is there to connect to us and let us know that you are interested, that there's a sense of fit. You're not all going to get to visit our campus. We'd you're welcome to. But if you can kind of convey to us and do the dance with us, we're going to be more compelled to take a shot on your application. We can see and watch and see how much you engage us through the process. If you're opening our emails and interacting with some of the things that we send, we can follow that and see that sense of connection to us. So we will talk a lot about your demonstrated fit and demonstrated connection to the school and all the ways that you can show that.
So similarly to Lafayette, we too value demonstrated interest, and it's something that we talk a lot about in our community discussions. So in addition to some of the ways that Ed just mentioned, other ways that you can do this, signing up for our information sessions that we host in the region, attending the high school visits when we come to the College and Career Center, writing an email and sending it to your territory person, the person's in charge of this particular region from those particular schools. All of these things will get documented, and when we sit down in late March, early April to talk about the applications, we'll pull this document up where we see all of these interactions, and people who may not necessarily be familiar with the area, if they see all of these interactions, they'll be like, well, that's the kind of kid that we want here, because they want to be here. So we want to ask you to the dance and say yes. And so that's kind of the situation.
So for Rutgers, demonstrated interest is it's not considered at all in terms of our admissions decision. However, if you are an admitted student and you receive you'll receive, along with your admission, either some sort of scholarship offer or no scholarship offer, that's where demonstrated interest can come into play. For students who demonstrate interest once admitted, it puts me in a position as a regional representative to be able to lobby for that student to be able to get them more scholarship assistance. For a student who doesn't show interest in Rutgers, I have no extra information with which to advocate for them. So.
I'd like to talk about, Marty and I were talking about this at dinner. Demonstrated interest is very, very important, probably at all schools nowadays. And emails, opening your emails, very important. Sending us emails can also be important, but I also would want to stress you do not need to write to us every week to update us on what you're doing this week. And we get a lot of those, and it's so heartwarming, but it really isn't necessary. Don't feel that you have to do it. You're not going to be penalized if you don't. But do email us to say, I want you to know that Northeastern is my first choice, or one of my first choice universities, and maybe a month later you might say, oh, and I was just named captain to the my soccer team, or I just passed my level 10 merit accomplishment in piano. Those are things we should know, but please, use some common sense. But I think the most important thing is, if somebody says to you, I send an email every week to my counselor, don't feel the pressure to do the same thing. It's not something you have to do.
Nor necessarily advisable. Oh, you're great. What about interviews? Ed, you alluded to interviews a little bit. I think I know the answer, but for the sake of the audience, do any of your schools require interviews for the admission process? Show of hands, anyone? Didn't think so. Does your school offer the opportunity to interview? And if so, what's the benefit of doing that? I think at Lafayette, we talked a little bit about demonstrated interest and fit. Others of you have things to add? Or?
Yeah, we do highly encourage the interview, and a large percentage of our students do the interview. Showing up is 80% of the process. Don't worry about being nervous. Don't worry about the actual interview. I mean, if you can talk about yourself, answer those questions, why you want to go to college, what you like about Lafayette, and tell stories about your background, it's going to work to your benefit. So we highly encourage that. It is a very high level of demonstrated interest. And just to understand, I hope you just claim ownership of this process. It's a life skill. It's not a gimmick to get into college, but it's something you're going to do the rest of your life. We're going to start teaching it more in your senior year when you get to career services. But that ability to step out in front of a stranger and talk about your background, take ownership of that. It's a chance for us to really bring to life and see in 3D who you are. And so many times we talked about activities maybe looking or feeling flat, or resumes or essays. Sometimes when we meet students, we get so excited to see their passion and to see their energy and their enthusiasm that it really can convey a great energy to us. But really, showing up and not wearing a Lehigh shirt, our arch rival, that's half the battle. That's half the battle right there.
I will say that we're interviewing the students, not the parents. So parents, just make sure that you're aware that you're not part of this interview process.
You're laughing, but he's telling you for a reason.
We have that awkward moment where, yeah.
What about, is there any difference between interviewing with an admissions representative versus an alum?
They're valued the same way. They're different. There's probably different preparation. We on the admissions panel know that you're applying to other schools. Our alumni are passionate about Lafayette, right? They don't want to hear about the other schools. So sometimes preparation is a little different. Understanding as you go into an interview, feel confident in who you are. Don't second guess the reaction of the interviewer. They may be mean to everybody. Understand that. Their write-up may be great. That guy growled at me the whole time. But they might write into us and say, that was my favorite student I've ever met in 25 years of interviewing. So don't kind of guess, but understand that the alumni interview will look and feel different than it will meeting with us. I would always say, and meet with the admissions counselor. We're friendly. We like you.
And to add to that, if there's some sort of iffy experience with an alumni interviewer, let your counselors know. And the counselors let us know or contact the college themselves, because those are things that sometimes we don't get to screen on a yearly basis the people that we have interviewing us. So it's really important for us to be able to get to know that so that the experience can be correct.
Absolutely, absolutely. There was one more thing I was going to ask you about. Oh, what if a student is generally nervous? Should they avoid this, or should they suck it up and make themselves feel a little bit uncomfortable so that you can, because they can still tell you about themselves, but you know, they're nervous. So what are your thoughts?
Is this where the bodily functions come in, Marty?
Well, yes, it is. No, but I think there really is a fine line. I think if a student is just genuinely nervous and, you know, because Trinity's their first choice and they're applying early decision, and they really want to make a good impression, and there's just, you know, sweaty hands and they're just really, really anxious, try some coping mechanisms, whatever it is you have to do. No coffee that morning, no caffeine or what have you, to calm yourself. But I think there may be some people here for whom an interview is not going to be a good choice. And I think that's something that's a personal conversation that you need to have with your counselor, because there are certainly students that we've all met with and probably have met with and interviewed on the road this year that should not have come out for an interview. But I think those cases are very, very few and far between. But again, if it's just general nervousness, you know, like Ed said, this is a life skill. This is something you're going to continue to do interviews to become a tour guide on our campus, or for part-time jobs in college, or internships, things like that. So it's something you're just going to have to learn to deal with.
And one more question, not on the paper, but these happen in senior year or junior year?
Oh, they should have been done by freshman year. All senior year. Well, I mean, we have students that will come out in the spring and take advantage of being on campus, but most of the students through the summer and fall of their senior year are doing the interviews.
And that's what I would suggest, but I wanted. Yeah. Great. Can we talk a little bit about early applications? So early action, basically what I call early notification, non-binding. You don't necessarily have to go to that school should you be admitted early, although they hope you will, versus early decision. And what are the benefits of applying using either early program, early action, or early decision for your particular institution if you offer those programs?
So, go.
Okay. One thing you should know is that early decision and early action are applied differently at every institution. So if we go down the line, we're all going to have different answers. But feel free to ask, like, what does applying early action or early decision look like at your school? The one thing I would really sincerely caution anybody is, if you're applying early decision to a school, you're applying without full knowledge of financial aid in most cases. So you're taking a big risk in applying early decision. But for some schools, that's a strategic move, and there's some, just talk it through with the admission counselors. Like, we're here to help you through that process to figure out if early decision or early action is a good option. For me, I always encourage every single one of my students I meet to apply early action, because at Miami, that's priority consideration for scholarships, for honors to our School of Business, or admission to our School of Business, for honors, like all those all different areas. So it's all benefit, literally zero negative consequence.
So at Rutgers, we have early action. There is not an advantage to applying early action. The applicant is looked at the same if they apply early, which for us is November 1st, or if they apply later. I do recommend that every student apply by December 1st, because that is the day by which students need to apply if they want merit-based aid or consideration for our honors college or honors programs. Our institution has a rolling aspect in the sense that students can continue to apply after December 1st, and we'll accept applicants up until the point where we begin filling the schools and then we close the application. But again, we think you probably want that extra money, so please apply by December 1st.
At Northeastern, I would say students are given equal consideration when they apply early and also when they apply regular for admission. But we say on our website, early action, probably historically, students who apply early action are more interested in all of our institutions. And so we tend to perhaps give them ultimately a bump because of that. A small one, but it's sort of like the bump for demonstrated interest or anything else. It's just, we think you're more interested in us perhaps than a regular decision applicant. We say on the website, if you want to put your best foot forward, it's a good idea to apply early, because you're showing that you've done your homework, you're familiar with the institution, and you're eager to apply early. But on the other hand, you are certainly, I would say, not penalized scholarship-wise or admission-wise, usually, if you apply regular decision.
Why would you recommend a student not apply early? Like, I can think of some situations where I would say that's not a good choice for you. But I'm curious, and I am happy to tell you what those are, but I'm curious, who maybe shouldn't apply early?
Well, one reason I can think of is if you had a decline junior year and you want to show us, the first time we see your application, you want to show some improvement, maybe regular decision is better for you. Some students are so involved in the fall and that there may be, they should have done this in the spring, in the summer before their senior year. But if you can't submit the best application possible, then you should wait and apply regular. So that's, I would say, don't feel pressured to apply early, except maybe at Miami. But you want to submit a really strong application, and if you feel that the strongest you can submit is through RD, then that's the best for you.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Yes, for some schools you could get scholarship consideration by applying earlier, but on the other hand, if the student needs to show you first semester senior year grades, they're going to be more admissible if that's something that you need to see. So that's what I was trying to get at. Thank you. What about the role of legacy in the admissions process at your institution? And, well, can you kind of define what legacy means at your particular institution? Because I think that sometimes the definition will vary from place to place.
So the definition of legacy at Providence is mother or father who is a graduate, or if you have a sibling who's a current student. And that does include, interestingly enough, when we have sets of twins who are in the applicant pool. So we've had a situation this year where one twin went EA and was admitted just before Christmas, and then the twin didn't apply until regular decision, and they got the legacy bump.
Ah, interesting.
So, which I thought, and the other twin needed it. The other twin definitely needed it. So that's our definition. And again, it's important to us. I think, the legacy connection is important to everybody here, but it's never going to supersede, sort of our bottom line. I think, as Ed said before, it's for us to be able to present a cohort of students to our faculty that can do the work, but also be good members of our community.
So actually, I think it's more of a public institution model that legacy is not considered an admission, as it is not at Rutgers. And believe me, I know, because we have like 500,000 living alumni, and I feel like all of them are always asking me this question. But I will say, though, that there are Rutgers alumni scholarships for which admitted students can be eligible, and other students would not be. So there are advantages.
Great. How about student athletes? So how are they evaluated differently if they are? I'm guessing we're talking about, well, I guess the difference between a Division I, Division II institution where perhaps they are recruited and potentially have scholarship associated with that. But I'm also curious for D3 institutions what role that plays. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Lafayette, we are small. We're 2,500 students. We are Division I. We field 23 varsity Division I sports. So our coaches really work closely with the athletes. They will do an admissions review, work closely with the admissions office. Most of our athletes in the Patriot League, it's a great conference. We play against the Ivy League. But most of our athletes will apply early decision after working specifically with the coaches to make sure that they can compete on the field, but also do the work academically.
So I work for Trinity, that is Division III NASCAC, so it's primarily the Northeast smaller liberal arts colleges. In terms of being Division III, our coaches do recruit, and we help them by offering pre-reads to see the students that they're working with and whether or not they would be admissible or not to our schools. So through that relationship that we develop with the coaches and the coaches with the student athletes, they will be able to determine whether the students that they're working with are in fact going to be admissible. And so with that, they'll encourage like an ED round or whether they're going to go through a regular decision round. And our number one sport is squash, if there's any squash players in here.
Good to know.
We won the national championships this year. Did you guys know that?
Cool. And I always just recommend that students who are thinking about this really have an honest, ask the admissions representatives for some specific guidance at their institutions. And then, of course, let us know and we can kind of work together. Any special consideration for students who are members of underrepresented groups? That could be first-generation college students, students from a particular geographic area. Anyway, I'm curious how that factors into your admission decision, if at all.
Yeah, I think that diversity means lots of different things to lots of different people, and the list that you have here, I think, definitely summarizes that very well. We look at diversity in lots of different ways, and particularly for a place like Providence that is, right now a very I-95 centric school, they are very serious about, increasing their geographic diversity, so much so that they hired a very good looking man to recruit for them out. Oh, wait, that's me. Yeah, they're like, who? But, so they hired, created a new position, hired me to recruit, on the West Coast. But I would say, yes, there are special considerations given to, I think, particularly for us first-generation students that come from outside of the I-95 corridor. But I think also other talents as well, and whatever talent might be, that could be, for us, Division I hockey players and basketball and things like that. But that is, that could also be, talented musicians or actor or actress, something like that. So, and also special considerations for us for sort of underrepresented majors on campus as well. Now, I'm not saying, if you come in and say you're going to be a German major, that's going to be your automatic ticket to admission because we have a small number of German majors, but that will definitely be something, if you're truly interested in a more unique program, then by all means, that's something we definitely take into consideration.
Yeah, we will, just to echo that, we would honor all types of diversity. We do have a fly-in program too, a lot of schools do, and we will fly first-generation students to campus. We do it in November to try to show you snow, to see if you're really going to survive there. But many schools will offer that opportunity for students to come and see our campus, to kind of take a deep look at it. You'll spend a weekend on campus and really get to take us for a test run.
Great. We're wrapping up here. Financial aid, this is also kind of curious about true or false here. Is there a disadvantage to indicating on the application that you will be considering applying for need-based aid?
Absolutely not. And if you're considering doing it, don't do it after the fact. So let us know, because that checkbox on the common application will get you into the financial aid communication flow. And there's a lot of information to process there. Thankfully, the federal government approved what's called prior year, so it's much easier to submit your taxes in your FAFSA. You can do that in October of your senior year. Many of our schools also require another form called the profile, but there's a lot of information that by checking that box on the application, yes, I want to consider applying for financial aid, you will get in the communications flow from financial aid. If you decide later you don't want it, no problem for us. You can just let us know. But check that box off and be honest to the process so that you can keep up to date and in step with what you need to do for financial aid.
And just one quick thing to add to, while everyone's kind of in tax mode right now, keep your tax documents safely stored where you can remember where they are. Because something that's happening right now is as students are applying for financial aid, there was a glitch essentially with the tool that allowed the FAFSA to pull information from the IRS. And so all these families who are applying for financial aid, like right now in peak financial aid season, all of a sudden don't have access to this tool and are trying to find this information. So the information that you're preparing now for your taxes is going to be what's used for next year's financial aid application. So just keep that handy.
Are you need aware or need blind in your admission process? In
Need
other
blind.
words, will the fact that you might need money to go to college impact your admission decision?
No.
So no for us, we're need blind with the exception of we are need aware for the waitlist students.
And we are need aware in our final committees. We will look at the family's ability to pay how much financial aid and scholarship and grant money that we will put out, and we may have to alter or adjust decisions based on that cohort, that year's class that we have. So we would put a need-aware lens in upper level admissions circles to find out and make sure that we're doing things that we can pay for.
And we are also need aware, but this would mostly affect students that are in the margins. And we know who we want to admit, and we can admit a few more, and then we'll have to see how much money do we have left that we could give in scholarship, and so that at that point in time, it may affect a student. If you're clearly admissible, we're need blind at that point.
We're need aware as well, and that really just comes down to limited resources because we do meet 100% of demonstrated need. So that's the piece why.
A typical public institution model, need blind.
And I would just argue that if you are concerned about paying for college, don't let the fact that they might be need aware prevent you from applying for financial aid. That doesn't make sense. You need to be able to apply for aid, see what is offered before you decide. Do your institutions give merit scholarship in addition to need-based scholarship?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
That's what I thought. Thank you. If a student applies early decision, are they unlikely to receive merit scholarship?
No, they are likely. It doesn't matter. And we might be unusual, I don't know. Early action, early decision, it doesn't matter. It's all the same.
That's some of the myths that are out there, so thank you. And you've answered my last question, which had to do with wait lists. And, when it comes to awarding aid to students on the wait list, I'm guessing at that point a lot of the financial aid budget has been dispersed or allocated, and that can be a tougher decision. Anything else you want to say?
I will say that last year we did take off very needy students off our wait list.
How many?
I'm not sure how many.
Oh,
we
I
took
thought
off.
you said a number, forgive me.
No, but we did take off students who needed financial aid off our wait list. We did save a little pocket of money for some of the kids that went up the wait list.
Fantastic.
It's different experience.
So clearly different at different institutions. Wow, lots of information, super valuable. Please join me in thanking our guests tonight. Show them appreciation. Oh, you're too kind.
Sandra is so knowledgeable. Really trust your counselors here at Paly. They're going to give you some really, really good advice.
You're very sweet.
And Sandra asked us to prepare some really good questions, and so we appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. Know that there are a lot more resources online on Paly.net, Naviance, the Viking Guide, all kinds of things. This is not the last of information. Have a great night. Thanks for your patience and staying late, because I think this was amazing in terms of their insight.